It's a twofer.
I was just going to suggest that when you build your wizard staff, you have the piece at the top, which is where Gandalf has his pipe.
His little pipe, yeah.
Oh yeah.
So you can build that into your world too.
Make sure there's a reason for them having the pipe there and not having it stored anywhere
Oh,
else.
I guarantee you there's a reason. He's read my novel. Natassha, it has been a long time since we've spoken. How are you?
It has. I am doing well. Sunfall is done, all sorted, and I am now working on the synopsis and the blurb and getting ready to send it to literary agents.
Congratulations.
Damn.
It's been a long journey. It's been 7 years since I started it, so
yeah. It's gonna be a big year, I feel, for books. There's a lot of us are wrapping things up and putting out new books. This is awesome.
It'll be good. Can't wait to finally sort of start sending it to people, because that's just been the one thing that's been on. It's like, right, I need to get this done so I can actually start sending it out, because that's just the next step.
Yeah.
Well, I'm finally there.
Yeah, I was just telling Ben that mine is pretty much done. I'm sending it to beta readers and my final proofreader, and then it's publishing after that. So like once I send it to them, then I have to start tackling the cover. It's the last piece of the puzzle. Yeah.
Yeah. See, that's why I'm going traditional publishing routes, because I cannot be asked to do all that.
See, I'm going traditional specifically because I want like a lot of control over that kind of stuff. Like
You're going indie.
Yeah. I may not have the artistic talent to pull it off, but I know what I want, and so it's all part of the storytelling to me. It's all part of the packaging. It's a product. I if it's my story, then I want my cover. My vision for the cover.
Yeah. See, I mean, I'm going traditional publishing because I think I'd be too opinionated on the cover, because I do a lot of my own artwork, and I'd sort of be like, you just do what you think suits it. I'll give my opinion at the end. You just go and do it.
Yeah, and that's the way to go about it, though, right? Is everybody does whatever is right for them and their project. That's perfect. That's great. That's how it works for you. That's wonderful. Ben, I know, went with Meeblart for his 2 covers. Mm-hmm. And if I remember correctly, you're very happy with both. I think they look great.
Yeah, beautiful. I can.
Oh, yes, please.
Right here.
Let me see.
Yeah, we got number 1.
Oh, nice.
There we go. Yeah.
It's a
got a guy falling through into a hole, and then we got this one here is the second one.
Nice.
There we go. No more glare.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah,
very nice.
So I'm really happy with what they did.
I got my first short story right here as well. I made this one myself, though. I made the cover.
Nice.
Cool.
Yeah, it's been doing the rounds in your newsletter too.
Yeah, free in the newsletter. You can buy the ebook for 99 cents, and then the print just became available. It's $6.99. I don't expect anybody to spend $6.99 on a short story and 3 sample chapters, but I just wanted the experience. Well, I didn't publish it to make money off of this one. This was, number 1, a test run for me. Like, I need to learn how to do this. By the time I publish the actual novel, I need to know what I'm doing. I can't be like figuring it out. It needs to go well. So, this is the first test run, and then I got 4 short stories coming, and I'm going to collect those into a little thing and put out a short story collection. So I'll get another thing published before the main novel comes out, just so because this one, for example, it looks great, but it's riddled with imperfections in the cut, and the binding is like crooked, like the words on it, rather, not the binding itself, but the words on it is crooked. So like things that I need to be better about next time and really nail. And it was just fun to actually do it and to actually hold a little thing in my hands.
And sort of say, yes, I did this. This is entirely mine.
Yeah, It's pretty wild. Especially since the when I printed it out, it looked pretty pretty thick, and I was like, and then no, it's a little tiny thing, so makes me feel better about my actual novel. It's like, man, maybe it won't look too big.
Yeah, I think I'm just going to have that problem anyway. Like, it looks massive on the Word document, and it's probably just going to look even more massive when it's actually printed out. I'll be like, oh god, I created a monster.
I'm all for it. I mean, if you look at my shelves, like I prefer the thicker.
Yeah, you
books
got
like
a few
that.
Brandon Sanderson's, Brandon
Yeah.
Sanderson back there.
Yeah, I prefer the thicker, the big chunky reads. So
It makes for good weapons to have next to your bedside.
absolutely, you got to think about the zombie apocalypse. You got to be ready.
Exactly.
Just blunt objects everywhere. So
Yeah.
So that's what I read. So that's tends to be what I write. I have a really hard time writing shorter stories.
Yeah, no, I can't write short stories. The only time I've ever written short stories is when I've like been really in mood for it, or for when it's like an exam piece or something like that. Other than that, mine always go over like 50,000 words, and I'm like, I'm not even halfway done with this thing.
That short story became a novel series real fast.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. So we wanted to gather today to talk about magic in our writing, and how to maybe portray our magic without gigantic, boring info dumps. And that is kind of where I'm coming from in my series, where it's presented very much sci-fi, and the magic starts to kind of creep in, the fantasy starts to creep in a little bit in this first book. By the end of the first book, you should have a good idea of like, oh, it's a sci-fi fantasy. There's going to be some magic stuff going on. The second book, we can dive deep into it. And so because of that, I treat it almost like a soft magic system in the first book, because it's supposed to be kind of mysterious to both the readers and the characters as well. In the second book, it's going to get fleshed out to where I have to write it as a hard magic system. At that point, I have to develop it as a hard magic system. So that's a nice little experiment that I'm doing. What about you guys? Soft magic, hard magic? What's your experience been writing magic into your stories? We're going to start with Ben, and then we'll go around to Natassha.
Sure. So it's definitely a hard magic system. There are clear rules. The problem is that, especially in the first book, they are just sort of learning it as they go. And it's not until halfway through that somebody comes along and says, hey, this is what it is. This is how it works. This is what you can do. And let me train you. So I get kind of the best and worst of both worlds with that.
It sounds similar to what I'm doing, though, where it's more mysterious in the first, and then more fleshed out in the second.
Yeah. Well, I mean, at the first, they're just like, oh, hey, we can do this. We can do this. It's incredible. Let's see what else we can do. And that's kind of just discovered as we go along. And then it becomes, hey, here's what you've been doing. This is how it works. This is what you can do. And let me, hone your skills.
Nice.
What about you?
Yeah, mine's quite different to that. Mine sort of throws you straight into the middle of it. So my world, there's two different sets of magic. They're similar but different. And they're already fleshed out. There's already a full set of rules there. There's schools for the magic, but one difference is my main character can't actually use magic. So most people around her can use magic, so you see them using different spells, but she actually can't for reasons I won't say here because I don't want to spoil the book.
Of course not.
But yeah, she actually can't use magic, so she sees magic through the eyes of essentially someone who's just a non-mage, basically. So everyone else is able to do all these amazing spells, and she's just there watching it, trying to figure out how it works because she has no idea, basically.
Well, that's what I was going to say. It gives you the everyman character, right? The everyman point of view, the reader. The character's discovering it along with the reader.
Yeah, so they learn it as she learns it, and they learn more about the magic in the world as she sort of interacts with different people, the different types of magic and stuff like that, which makes it easier for me to write it, but also more difficult because I'm like, right, why does this person use this spell? How can he use it? How does this work? And how can I put it forward in a way that makes sense to both the reader and to my character?
Mm-hmm. Cool. And the way that you described it, you have the one main character who is the only person who can't use magic, or are there other people?
Yeah, so in the
Without
story,
going into spoilers.
yeah, at the moment she's the only one who can't use magic. Basically, everyone else that she encounters in the story, apart from a few people who are non-mages, but there's different reasons for that. But yeah, she's the only one who can't actually use magic.
Okay.
So interesting, like just kind of sticking out in the world is like one of the only people. Like you look around and you feel so alone, and everybody can do amazing things and you can't. So then, like, that makes me honestly really want to read it. I want to know how this character rises up, to kind of meet that challenge head on. Like how do you stand out and be special when you're the most unspecial thing around, right?
Like she has a few skills that differ from other people.
Exactly.
Saying she can't use magic it's wrong, but it's also right. She can't use magic in the traditional sense, but there's other things that she can do that other people can't because of the thing that's causing her not to be able to use magic.
Interesting. Yeah, that rings familiar to me too. There's elements that I'm working on like that in my book where my character has certain abilities that are natural to her, and then there's also magic that she can tap into. Same thing with the villain. He has like innate abilities within himself that nobody else would have, but on top of that, he can also reach out into the magic stuff. So yeah, cool.
Nice.
Cool. I like it. What how did you guys get started with the whole magic thing? Was it daunting? Like I remember it being kind of intimidating.
It was a little bit. I mean, I've written a few sort of fan fiction stories that involved magic, but not anywhere near as heavily as this one does. And I was like, right, what are the rules I want for this magic? What can they do? What can't they do? How does this magic work? How does each individual magic work for each different person? And why does it work that way? And what are the sort of consequences for these people using these spells? So I sort of sat back and was like, right, I need to set these ground rules, otherwise it's just going to get out of control, and I'm going to go back through it and be like, nah, I just need to trash this entire thing and start from the beginning. So that was quite difficult, laying out the ground rules, because I'd not done anything like that. I'd just basically been playing in other people's sandboxes with their own magic. But once I had those ground rules out, actually working within them was all right, because I knew where I was.
Sorry,
What about you?
let me just check my audio for 1 second. Okay, good. Sorry about that. I want to make sure that I'm coming in through my microphone and not my headset, because that would make me sound much worse. Anyways, yes. So in terms of my magic system, I built it off the characters, because I had characters that I wanted to do specific things, and then I kind of built the magic system around that. So I have one guy who can, do telekinesis. I had another person who could do transforming materials, and I had a whole bunch of different specific character roles that I wanted to fulfill, and then I guess I built the magic in a way which, it did evolve, and it's not quite the same as what I started with, but that was my initial template. If I want this person to be able to do this, how do I design the magic to allow them to do that?
Nice.
That's cool. Yeah, I suppose that's kind of how I started as well, because it started with one particular character's abilities, and then I kind of extrapolated from there. But I also had like a vague idea of how like the world magic would work. You know what I mean? Like just like apart from my character, and I suppose what I had to do was bridge the gap between those two concepts.
Yeah.
Right. The idea of like the overworld magic versus my character's magic, and then just kind of having to like connect them and find a way that they can coexist and work together. I'm going to share a thing here. Let's see. Share screen. So I've got here, and I'm such a bad note taker. I forgot to write down who the author that is a proponent for these rules, as it were, but he gives these as the rules of writing magic systems. 1, the author's ability to solve conflict with magic is directly proportional to how well the reader understands the magic. Therefore, the more it's understood, the more it can be used. The less it's understood, the less it can be used. Number 2, weaknesses. Limits and costs are more interesting than powers. Pay a cost or put limits on the magic's use to keep the stakes. I found that very, very important. And number 3, the author should expand on what is already in the magic system rather than adding something new, as this may change how the magic system works. And that's more, I feel like, for the nuts and bolts of the process, you know, like a rule for the author to like not make it harder on them later on when they add a new piece of magic and now the rules don't make sense anymore.
Yeah, they've broken the system.
They've broken the system, yeah. So don't break the system. You know, play within the sandbox that you created. Don't bring in new sand that doesn't match. So I just wanted to throw this up, read it out loud, and get you guys' thoughts on these things. You know, whatever comes to mind, or whatever you want to pick about it.
I mean, I had quite a lot of fun with the weakness part of things, because, you know, magic is great and wonderful and everyone wants to be able to throw a fireball, but everyone also wants to know, what is the cost of that? Does it burn you from the inside out if you use it too much? Does it sap your energy and knock you completely out? I want to know what the effect is on that person and why it affects them in that way, and why, if that's the case, it affects different people differently. So I had quite a lot of fun implementing all the weaknesses into my characters and according to their strengths as well. So somebody who's stronger, it affects them differently, and different spells affect them differently. So yeah, I had quite a lot of fun putting that in. That was probably my favourite part of writing magic.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's not so much what you can do with the magic, it's where the limits are and how you can maybe circumvent it or show some really unique way of utilizing the magic that makes it so much more interesting than somebody just coming through and, you know, blowing up a house or something when all they need to do is open the door.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was going to say, in terms of weaknesses or costs or anything like that, a lot of the primary issues within my first 2 books were caused directly because of their inexperience with the magic or their inability to use it correctly that led to the larger threats in the series. And as far as bullet point number 3, I have a lot of room to work with because, like I said, they're learning their small part of the magic system. So I established that there's more to it than that, but I don't really have somebody who's experienced in those other methods. So there is room to grow within the established system that I'm going to sort of flesh out as it goes on. So that's kind of how I got around a few of those.
Yeah.
Nice.
How I obeyed those magic system rules.
Yeah, I mean, I'm quite similar. I have sort of specific spells that they sort of use frequently and you get used to. But other than that, I've sort of kept things a little bit vague. So if further down the line in book 2, I want to add a certain spell in, it doesn't sort of turn everything on its head. And then I have to go back and go, oh, well, this is the reason he can use that, and try and desperately fill in the plot holes that I've created.
Yeah. Yeah, that and because I wasn't getting as detailed with the readers in this first book, I tried to limit, you know, the magic pretty greatly because of that very thing. I don't want to set something up here and then, you know, come to find out that I goofed up the rules later on. I have to go back and republish this whole thing. Yeah, that would be nuts. So you know, the idea of like fleshing out the rules with both the characters and the readers, that's something that I'm looking forward to, but I consider it a pretty big challenge because that's where things tend to fall apart. It's the same thing with sci-fi. Once you explain the science too much, then you get the nerds that pick it all apart. And the same thing is true with fantasy. If you get a little too detailed with the magic, well, then people are like, well, then this doesn't make sense. So like, while I love complex hard magic systems, like for example something you know, Avatar: The Last Airbender, the way that it's so tied into their martial arts, into their mental being, and into their breath, and into all this stuff, and it's all just like that's really super awesome to like. I get really into that. But then once you get like pretty deep into Legend of Korra, you get the nerds that are like, wait a minute, they're breaking it. Like, it doesn't make sense anymore.
That's part of the reason why I haven't watched that one. It's like, no, I'm good with the first one. I don't want to watch the second one. Sort of spoil my childhood.
Korra's first and third seasons are as good as anything out of the original series. I stand by those 3 seasons, but 2 and 4 are kind of rough. I would say
that I don't know. I think that Korra is a little. We can go on that sidetrack, but I do think that Korra is a little bit worse than Avatar. Except for those 2 episodes where you learn about the first Avatar, which were just fantastic standalone.
See, but those are in season 2, and those are like the only like good thing out of season 2, and they're also part of what people say break the magic system. Once it muddies the waters a little bit. And I love those 2 episodes. I'm telling you, I love those 2 episodes. But it's in
those are like my favorite 2 episodes out of Korra.
But it's in the middle of like the worst season.
It's like you could have put it anywhere else. But
you could have put it anywhere else, but it's in the middle of the worst season. You're like, oh, I gotta sit through all of season 2 to get to these 2 damn episodes.
I don't know. I think I like what they did with season 2. I will say that it's interesting.
That's
and
crazy.
It makes sense.
It's crazy to me that you like season 2. I consider it the worst by far.
That's fair. We can talk about this offline or whatever when
we don't know. We can talk about it now. It's fun.
Go for it. It's quite entertaining to watch you guys discuss it because I have no idea what you're going on about.
I like that it expands in. So all the other seasons have a specific threat in mind, and that one season expands into good and evil. Like it becomes kind of an ultimate battle between the forces of good and evil, and it makes it more of a world-wide threat. As opposed to something
localized,
yeah. And they kept trying to make it localized. They kept trying to make it personal with the seasons 1, 3, and 4, and it just felt like a miss to me every time. So when they swing out there for that, I enjoyed it as something that was different.
I hear that. Right on, man. Okay.
But yes, I can absolutely understand. Any criticisms of Legend of Korra are completely valid.
Yeah, it has
you
its
like
ups
it,
and
you don't
downs,
like
man.
it based on your mileage.
I like it a lot. A lot, especially season 3. Season 3 is my favorite season.
Yeah, I can see that.
I think some of the best stuff is in season 3.
Mm-hmm.
But that's the same doesn't happen for Avatar: The Last Airbender.
Yeah, Avatar is like. It's like the
solid.
picture of the horse that's fully fleshed out the entire time.
That is just top tier TV. I remember I think it was when I was younger. I had raced back from school because I knew the last episode was on TV. I raced back from school as quick as I could. Pretty much vaulted the sofa to turn the TV on. It's like it's on. Finally, I can watch the end of it.
Yep.
Yeah, that's one of those series that ends so strong. Like so few series end as strong as that one did. That was a great ending.
And the way they built their magic, it was infused into their world, into their characters, their personalities.
It was believable as well. You could sit there and think, yeah, I could actually see somebody doing that.
You know what I love about it? You know what I love about it? You just said it's simple, right?
Yeah.
They establish the rules, just like the thing here says. They establish the rules and then they play within that sandbox so well. Because little things like, for example, Azula's fire being blue. They never discuss that. Nobody ever makes a reference to it. Nobody ever points it out among the characters. It's only something that we ever see. And I mean, obviously they see it, but they don't point it out. We don't talk about it on the show. But when Zuko and Aang go and meet the firebending masters, the dragons, and the dragons breathe their flame around them, there's all these colors in the flames. And you realize, okay, of course, there's different flame colors. Well, then what does that mean? That means that Azula's flame is so precise, that her firebending is so precise that she's maintaining a specific color on purpose. The entire time, and it speaks to how much greater of a firebender she is than everybody else around her. They don't have to tell you that. You just feel it because her flame is blue. You know what I mean? Like it's in there.
It's just such a little thing that
nobody needs to tell you. You just kind of know it. But then when you voice it out loud, you're like, oh, that makes sense. Yeah, that's why. You know what I mean? There's
It's
all
not. It's
kinds of
nice
little
to
things like
find
that.
those little things in there that make you go, oh yeah, and you look back and you think, oh my goodness, how did I miss that the first time?
The Last Airbender is riddled with that stuff. It's got
And
so many little things like that.
and that's why it's so great to watch and rewatch
Yeah.
frequently every year, however often you want to do it.
Yeah, I just rewatched. I've been trying to get my kids into it. I started them maybe a little too young, and it was a little too heady for them to dive into. But now I think they're at least my oldest is at an age where I think he can start to appreciate it. And so I've been showing him some episodes, and there's the one where, I forget what mission they're on or what they were doing, but Aang and Katara fall into the water with Appa, into like freezing cold water. And Aang goes into the avatar state, and you see that like kind of bubble thing happen around them, right? But it's not the bubble that they do around Appa's head so that he can breathe underwater. It was different, and it was very, very brief. But I like rewound and I watched it again, and I realized that the water swirls around them into like this dome shape. And then he turns the water inside that dome into air. He removes the hydrogen from the H2O and leaves the oxygen, because then what you realize is that Appa starts flying inside that bubble and flies them out of the water. Appa flies them out, not him. And he could only do that because he bent the water around him into air. And you're just... And they don't talk about it. Nobody's like, oh my god, Aang just turned the water. Nobody points it out. It's just there, and if you caught it, you caught it. If you didn't, you didn't. And there's all kinds of little stuff like that.
So that's the big difference between a TV show or something we can see visually and something that we are writing ourselves, because
you have to write it, right? You have to put it
in
on
our
the
story,
page.
you could say like, oh, and then Appa flew out of there, but you would have to have a character comment on that, because otherwise it's something that would just be lost.
Yeah.
Or it's just in the prose.
How did you get there? How did he go from the water up into the air?
Even if it's just in the prose, you have to explain what's happening. In order to use the phrase Appa flew them out of there, you have to explain that there was air for him to fly on. So you're forced to explain it, or else the reader is taken out of the moment. So like, how do you do that? Like, how do you hide those little moments in the prose of a novel? That's so challenging, and I know that it can be done, because there's so many novels out there that thrive on rereadability, and every time you reread it, you find something new, and you're like, oh man, how did I never catch this? I've read this book 4 times, and on the 5th one I catch this. What's going on? Things like that. Like, how did I do that? How did I do that?
Well, I would say write it.
Explain it to me.
So I would say you can go 2 different routes. You can go where you fully explain as much as you can, and then there's the other one where you do like a minimalist approach, and then just send it out to your beta readers and see which one works best. And it'll probably just be a combination of both of them. The compromise between the two. But because you're the author, so you would obviously know exactly what's happening, and then it's just how can we explain it. So you use your beta readers.
Yeah. I tended to go, when I was writing my first draft, I tended to just dump everything on the page and be like, right, I'm just going to put it there so I remember what I'm on about, because I'm like 100,000 words and I've got another 100,000 to go. I'm not going to remember this at the end of the day. And then when I read back, I'm like, right, I understand this, take that bit out, put it in my notes, and then I just start to slowly cut it down until it still makes sense if you really look at it. But if you don't, you have to sort of go back and go, oh, well, that's how it works. So that's what I found works for me. It's just dumping everything on there, like sort of opening my head, emptying it out onto the page, and then close it back up and going, yeah, no, that's done, I believe in that, and then go back and cutting it down.
Because I'll read stuff like I'll read George Martin's work, and it becomes quickly evident to me that he's not telling one story, he's telling 3. And that's not even to break down like how many points of view characters he has and how many storylines they're going on. That multiplies it even more. But within each chapter, I don't either. within each chapter, right? You could almost look at each chapter as a short story unto itself. You could probably pluck any chapter out of any Game of Thrones book randomly out and just dive in, and you'll never really be lost, because since the characters are always moving, they're always on journeys, there's always time in between the chapters that you don't see. There's always unseen travel time. So when you rejoin a character, he's resetting the scene for you. He's reestablishing where they are in their not only physically but in their time, and you know how much time has passed since the last time you saw them. You know how many adventures they've been on since the last time you saw them. Little things that happen in between the chapters. He's filling all of that in. So he's giving you the present. He's giving you the flashbacks, right? That all that is the story of the point of view character. On top of that, he's telling the history of the kingdoms and of the world, because the characters are always making references to this king back then and this, you know, warrior back when, and all, and you're filling in the story of the world by hearing it from them. So that's the second story he's telling you. And then within the world building itself, he tells a third story, which is this like astrological thing that he's doing, where he's telling stories of like basically the constellations of his world all have stories, and you're learning those stories through the landscape, through the histories that people are sharing. There's a whole third story that he's telling you. And as the characters are going through their adventures, they are mirroring those old stories, and so you learn more about them that way. And I honestly have no idea how he does it. And it's really infuriating, because I want to do it. Then again, he's been working 11 years now on the next book, so like it's not easy.
Yeah,
it's not something that you can just do.
Yeah, well, I mean, you say working, but the number of times I've seen him picture doing anything but writing is ridiculous.
Well, he's writing. He's writing just other things. He's writing other things. Yeah, like he admits it. He admits it. He knows that he's been procrastinating.
I feel like once HBO dumped the money truck in front of his house, he's been kind of.
He's very aware.
Putting Game of Thrones on hold.
He's probably sort of taken a look at it and gone, that can wait a little bit longer. It's fine. People will wait for it. Meanwhile, the people are just like, oh, come on, for God's sake.
I mean, I of course am very anxious for whenever the next book comes out. Absolutely. But at the same time, I get a little annoyed when people are annoyed with him, because I'm like, you even like the best writers admit that what he's doing is kind of like on another level. It's kind of crazy, the stuff that he's doing in these books. Like, just let him work, man. Like, chill out. It's gonna be great when we get it. Just leave him alone. And that's why I was such a huge fan of that song. I don't know if you guys heard it back when it came out. Neil Gaiman made a reference in a article or a blog or something in defense of George Martin, and the famous quote that people pulled out of that blog post was, George R.R. Martin is not your bitch. And it took off. It became a meme. There's a song called George Martin is not your bitch, and it's absolutely hysterical. And and that's usually what I fall back to, is like, just let the man work. Just
let him do his stuff. Let the master work.
Let him do his thing. It's gonna be fine. Just happy thoughts. Send him happy thoughts. Poor guy. It's gotta be hard. He's admitted to like getting in his own head. His series sparked the biggest television series of all time. In its day, and it's gotta be hard to follow up.
Especially with the way it ended.
It is now up to him to do something much, much better. And I have no doubt that his will be better. I have no doubt that his plan was different from what they did already. But I can tell he's probably like rethinking a lot of his choices, and like, probably writing and rewriting a lot. So
I think the last season of Game of Thrones, particularly, what episode was it where they had the battle at Winterfell?
It was called The Long Night.
That's the one. That is a good example of just dumping everything in and going, right, yeah. That's it. That's an example of how not to write magic and how not to write a story.
Exactly. Yeah. they're very vocal about how they just wanted to end it already. Like they just wanted to be done and free themselves up to do other things. And everyone, the actors, the writers, George Martin, they all agreed like there's more than enough material for you guys to have done 10 seasons, maybe even 12 seasons. The Long Night should have been minimum an entire season. You know what I mean? Like it should have
It should
been
have also
minimum
been filmed a little
10
bit brighter
episodes.
too.
Yeah.
There
Oh
were...
God, yeah.
That's of course, obviously, like it looked terrible, but writing wise, like it should have been an entire season. It really should have been.
Sorry, we're going to follow this tangent all the way to the end. But
no, hey, we're talking magic, man. That's why
yeah,
we're here. Let's do it.
That's fine.
Well, the
Yeah,
episode before it had all of those character moments that we have been waiting seasons and seasons to see, and even seeing characters who we didn't know we wanted to see together. We saw them having just a few phrases together, and that's all it took to get us really cheered and excited. And then
see that should have been maybe like the first or second episode of the season, and then the rest of the season should have been the entirety of the Long Night, plus perhaps little bits straying away from it, perhaps back to the Red Keep and stuff like that, whilst this Long Night is going on.
Think about this. If you gave the Long Night an entire season, right, then that would mean that you could give Tyrant Daenerys an entire season. And the thing that you had been clearly building to this entire time, which should have been a huge payoff and something that everybody was like, holy shit, it finally happened. Instead, it clashes because they feel like it came out of nowhere because you gave it an episode. When you should have given it a season. So like, you know, I almost want them to like remake the entire 8th season into like 5 seasons and just give me more, man. Just give me more. Bring everybody back. Forget the 2 dudes. Like they don't want to do it, fine. They don't have to. Like bring somebody else. Like we can just pick it up and redo it.
Yeah.
I mean, there's nothing new out there, so give it 10 more years, and I'm sure they'll have a reboot of Game of Thrones out there.
Yeah,
Bro.
if not all of it, then at least sort of the last couple of seasons.
If they do that, they gotta go big or go home.
Maybe they'll actually make it feel like less of like a first draft where you just dump everything on the page and go, yeah, that's fine, and actually like a finished piece. Because that's what it felt like. It felt like, I can't even remember their names. I don't even want it, to be honest. It just felt like they just sort of opened up a can of worms of just like, yeah, that'll do. Just dumped it on there and was like, yeah, go and act that out. That'll be fine. We're off now. Bye.
Yep.
Yeah, for sure.
Bad strategy, bad, so many things were bad there.
It was all bad.
I also feel like another problem might have been that they, after 8, let's call it 4 seasons of never missing, and then another 3 seasons of being hit. I think they were probably surrounded by a lot of yes men by the end there, who just didn't challenge any of their bad ideas and just let them do whatever they wanted. Definitely was part of it. George Martin had bowed out by then, so he didn't have any input. There's a lot of that.
I don't blame him, to be honest. I mean,
same.
God knows I would go if I saw my work being butchered like that. I'd be like, no.
Those first 4 seasons, though, man. Those first 4 seasons are so
good.
fucking good. They're so good.
It's like I don't think I started watching it until actually season 8. I'd sort of been like, no, I don't want anything to do with it. And then
at that point, you started the series and caught up.
Yeah, I started it from the beginning. A friend of mine was like, right, you need to go and watch this. And I think I saw my mum and sister watching a bit, and I'm like, actually, that looks reasonable. Even though this was season 8, I caught some of the best bits, and I was like, let's go and watch it. And I watched it, and it's like, oh my God, this is amazing. Please let the ending be good. This is so good. And it's like, oh, okay.
Dude, I didn't know anything about that series until the first season premiered, and I just remember HBO was making a really big deal about it, so I was like, all right, I'll check it out. My roommate was also one of those dudes that like just had his finger on the pulse of like what's going on TV, and he was like, what, we got to watch this when it comes out, and we watched that first season, and by the time the credits rolled on that finale, I was on my way to Barnes and Noble to pick up the book. I wanted to read and I read the whole first book, and then I had a debate with myself: do I read the next book or do I wait for the next season? And I go, well, I like the surprise of like watching it week to week. Season 1 like really shocked me, so I'm gonna wait for the next season. I watched season 2, and then I read all the books after that. Like I had read all the books before season 3 came out.
Yeah, see, I've not read any of the books.
I had to.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, I mean,
they're
I'm
so
tempted to add them to my little library episodes, but it's just like, do I really go out and get them when I know how badly it ended and when
Well,
it sort of
I was
put
going
me
to say
off
now.
so
I mean,
much?
you know
But
how
again,
how the show ends. You
how
don't
the
know how
show
the
ends.
season ends. You don't know how you don't know how the books end.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're not going to end like that. I'm telling you.
No, I mean, I
it's
might
not
wait
gonna be
until
like
the
that.
last book is out and I can just binge read it.
That's
Good
fair
luck with
enough.
that. I think that one's going to be perpetually TBD.
Ben, not in my house. We have hope here.
We might get Winds of Winter out in like 5 more years.
In
I don't
my
think we'll ever get
house,
the last 2.
we are optimistic that George Martin tomorrow will be like, psych, I wrote both books. They're done. Here you go. It could happen.
That's why he keeps getting in so much trouble, because he keeps coming up with more and more books. Like, he'll split off the book that he's working on into 2 more books, and then he'll take the second book, and then he'll split that off into 2 more books. It's like the
oh my god,
fraction, refraction.
Can you imagine how, like, the crack in the world if tomorrow George Martin was like, it was taking me a long time, but only because I wanted to finish the entire series. Both of the final books are done. It's over. Here comes book 6, book 7 in 6 months. Go nuts. And like, just the planet would just go insane.
I think the world just break.
I was going to say, I think you're confusing George R. R. Martin with Brandon Sanderson.
Dude, so I love when authors just shake shit up like that, man.
I really want to be like that. I want to be that sort of chaotic energy in the world. Just sort of come out with like, yeah, there's a new book, go out and buy it.
Yeah. Oops, I wrote 4 books this year. I was really bored.
And then just sort of peace out for the next 2 years to the point where people are going, is she dead? Is she still alive? And it's like, no, I'm still alive and there's 6 more books.
Yeah, but not only that, but like the stuff that he's doing with like pulling out of Audible and like, you know, speaking out against them and all that stuff, like it's kind of wild. Like he's a rebel, revolutionary, fighting the good fight. Yeah, man. Like it's just so weird because you think of like Neil Gaiman and like when he was younger, you know, with the leather jacket and everything, he had like that whole like rock star author energy, you know. And then you got guys like Alan Moore who are just like unapproachable, like just like fuck off, I'm writing books. You got, you know, Stephen King, who like writes some of the craziest, creepiest stuff like 6 times a year, just cranking them out, just like here's books all year. It's
you get bananas. A book, you get a book, everybody gets a book.
Books everywhere. He's just making it rain books. Dude, yeah. See, my vision, or at least intention for my career, is more of like an event. You know, every time my book comes out, it's an event. Oh, Books by Adrian is coming out, you know, like a freaking once every 2 years, a big ass fucking meaty novel falls on your desk, you know.
Just falls from the sky and breaks the table.
Just when you're like, Jesus. Fine, I'll read it.
It's like, geez, God.
Yeah, I just want to throw it at people.
Yeah, I mean, I'd quite like to do that. I mean, I've got Sunfall, which obviously I hope to get published hopefully in this year, and then I've got the second one, which I need to actually start planning for. And then after that, I think I'm going to do like another 5-book series and just hopefully sort of perhaps do like 1 a year or something like that, and just slowly release them over that, just so it sort of keeps the momentum going, keeps the hype going. And in the meantime, whilst that's going, I can quickly think of the next idea for a book.
Nice.
Yeah, I'm having to like write little short stories and stuff for like the in-betweeners, you know, like in between each novel I should be able to put out like a little short story collection or something, just to keep people around, keep people waiting for that next big one.
Well, that's because you have a newsletter, so you have your very good magnets that you're using to feed into your books that keeps the cycle going.
That's the idea. Yeah, like keep, you know, sending out short stories to the newsletter, getting their feedback on it, polishing them up a little bit, publish those into a collection, write some more for the newsletter, and just keep it going.
Yep.
Yeah. Nice. Keep the rotation going. It's a challenge though, because I don't really write short stories. It's been really hard.
Yeah, no, I know the pain. I can't physically bring myself to write a short story unless
Yeah.
I'm really motivated or unless
It's like
like
there's
an
so much
exam
more.
piece. I know, you sort of look at it and you go, but that could be such a good world, and then you start writing, and then by the time you finish, you're like, oh, it's
Well,
10,000 words. Oh dear.
that's what I'm doing to keep myself from that problem, is that I'm at least setting all of these short stories in the series world, the same world as my novel series. So I'm not telling main character stories or even side character stories. It's more like the peripheral. You know, I'm just choosing like other players in the world and just kind of doing things with them, so that you're still in the world, you're still experiencing it, you can still learn things about it, but it makes you want to read the main series, like that's it.
Yeah. It sort of almost introduces you to the world and gives you a little bit of info to say, hey, you know, you could learn a lot more about this if you came and read the main thing. And then in the main one, you can perhaps see where that's been built on and go from there.
Exactly. Yeah. One of the ones that I'm doing, at least for this first like short story collection, I've got 4 that I have planned. And the first 2 are, one of them is a detective who is looking into missing persons, as opposed to my detective in the novel who's doing homicides, right? She's a murder detective. He's looking into missing persons, and he's realizing as many people are missing as she later realizes in the novel. She eventually solves this mystery. He doesn't, but he gets close. And so like I have to take him to like the edge of it, and then something horrible is going to happen. And then what ends up happening is all his equipment, all his high-tech stuff ends up in a particular place where later in the novel, I already have a sequence where she has to grab some of that stuff in order to accomplish her thing. So she's going to end up getting this thing and having his name, but never having met him. But the reader, if they read that short story, they'll have met him and they'll know what happened to him. So really little things like that. And then there's another sequence where in Faye, one of my main characters, in her first like introductory chapter, she runs this little shop, and she's kind of like this little hippie witch character. And a customer comes in, and she kind of reads people, and she reads this person and realizes this is a young lady who's in an abusive relationship. This is her boyfriend or whatever, and apparently he's a monster, and she's scared for her life. And so Faye sells her this like little knife, you know, but before she sells it to her, she puts a little spell on it, and nothing else ever happens in the book. It's just me showing that this is the kind of stuff that she does. The short story will follow that knife and to all the chaos that comes from it, you know. And it'll kind of open your eyes to like the actual thumbprint of these characters and how much they affect the world around them and stuff like that. So I'm trying to keep you in the world, you know. I'm trying to like and in that way appease my problem of not being able to write short stories. Like, oh, I can write like basically a chapter that doesn't exist in the novel, and it's just like its own little chapter, and that's a short story for me. That's how I'm doing it. Yeah. So what are you guys' kind of like hopes for your series magic systems? Like, you know, do you have any kind of like end game kind of scenario planned for these worlds and these magic systems and things like that? What do you guys think? Natassha, what do you got?
So again, spoilers, but the very end of the second novel, well, sort of end quarter of it, you're going to find out the reason behind the actual magic system existing in the way that it does, and how it existed before that, and what led up to that change in existence. And that's going to be the main crux of the matter, and that's going to end up being the climax of the last novel. And then what I also want to do, I'm toying with this idea at the moment because I have another idea for perhaps 4 or 5 book series. I'm wondering whether to set that in the same sort of world, but after the events of obviously Sunfall and the next book, and use the same sort of magic system and sort of go, well, you don't have to have read Sunfall and the second book to get this magic system, but it would be helpful if you did, and it would also be quite fun because there's going to be sort of little hints back to this world that we're currently in Sunfall in that second book. So I want it to sort of be a running theme, And again, you'll find out all the existence of it and why it exists like that. And then it will go on into the second book where you go, okay, I can see these differences and sort of see what caused this to happen. So yeah, I have a long-term plan for it.
Yeah, I'm actually in the same boat where the magic system is a tool that the characters use, and I've sort of put in little breadcrumbs here and there, and so I'm writing the third book now. I think in the fourth book, I'm actually going to have the characters go on a journey. It's either fourth or fifth one, where they go on a journey and they find out what caused the magic system to be in place and how it was essentially created. So we're on completely different paths, but I think we will ultimately sort of crossroads a little bit, where the characters will discover something about the magic, and that will be one of their goals. Whether or not they get there, whether or not they understand everything that means, I haven't thought that far ahead, but they will at least understand more about what started everything.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much what mine is going to be at the end of the day. There's in Sunfall, there's a book that's very important to the entirety of the story, and throughout the book, as in Sunfall, throughout it, they're slowly deciphering this book and slowly figuring out sort of what happened way back when and why it happened. And then again in the second book, they'll fully translate it, realize what happened, and they'll figure out why it was created, how it was created, and how that in the end of it affected them in the future.
Cool.
So, yeah. I mean, it's quite difficult to try and keep putting the little breadcrumbs out there without giving too much away. I know exactly where I need to go with it. I know exactly what happens and why, but it's trying to figure out how much I can get away with putting in there to make readers go, hang on a minute, that makes sense in a really weird sort of way, and then have them in the second book go, oh yeah, I see now. Without putting so much in there that go, right, oh, I understand now. I don't really need to read the second book.
Yeah.
Well, for me, it really helps that none of the characters actually know what's going on. They just kind of, oh, here's a hammer. Let me, hit a nail, or just let me use this hammer to make a hole in the wall or something. So they might not even be using it right. And then there are a few characters out there who know more than they do, but they still don't know everything. Yeah. So they have to kind of go on this journey to find more information.
It is challenging, the breadcrumbs thing, because I definitely am trying to do that, and I found, at least in the first round of critique partners, that maybe I hadn't revealed enough for things to be understood well enough. So in the next pass I did after that, the one that beta readers are getting now, there's a little bit more detail in there, flesh it out a little bit more, just to like give them something to grab onto and stand on for this one. But the interesting thing I think with mine is that, aside from like very, very faint or specific magics that exist in certain characters, aside from that, the magic system is mostly like this external thing that characters are going to be seeking, especially in the second and third books, where like they have to get an item or a material or something like that in order to have access to certain magics. And then what I intend to play with after that is the idea of, like, once you have like the thing that gives you access to the magic, how do you choose to then manipulate this thing? I was thinking about wizard staffs and like the crystal that many wizards have at the top of their staff, and that's a wizard who has found a thing and manipulated it into a thing that he can use in a certain way. And so like that's where I'm coming from, sort of. It's like, well, then what other things can we do with these substances and items that hold magics, and like how else can we manipulate them into different things? Can there be a magic gun? Can there be a magic, what I mean? Like how like how far can you take it? What can you craft with these things? And then sorry, go ahead.
No, go. You keep going. I was just going
to say that then the other side of it is then revealing like where it all comes from, and there's a very sci-fi answer to my magic system, because I wanted to tie my genres together, So that's part of the goal. The end goal is like having a very sci-fi answer to a very fantasy, element.
That is quite a challenge. I mean, it's challenging enough just to write a magic system, but to try and include sci-fi in that, yeah, no. No thanks, I'll stick with my fantasy.
It's a twofer.
I was just going to suggest that when you build your wizard staff, you have the piece at the top, which is where Gandalf has his pipe.
A little pipe, yeah.
Oh yeah.
So you can build that into your world too.
Make sure there's a reason for them having the pipe there and not having it stored anywhere.
Oh, I guarantee you, there's a reason. He's read my novel. There's a lot of weed in my novels. You know.
That's all you need to know about it. Nothing else but weed.
There's a lot of substance abuse in my novel. It's like, yeah, that makes total sense. Yeah, for sure. Character has a gun and like the pipe comes out of the bottom.
Yeah.
You're just giving me ideas, Ben. Like I gotta go back to another edit.
You're welcome. I'm sorry for that. Rich is not here. I gotta cause my own chaos.
Yeah.
You take on Richard's role when he's not here.
Oh, good grief. We don't need another one.
No, God, no, geez. One is enough.
Like
his presence is felt when he's not even here.
Yeah, he like haunts us. We're just like
instead of saying like Bloody Mary into the mirror, it's like Richard.
You've said his name 3 times now. Stop. It's not funny. I didn't give him the link, but I guarantee you he'll just materialize out of nowhere. Oh man. Yeah, those guys got together for a little dinner or something a couple of days ago, I think. Yesterday.
Yeah, I would have gone, but I'm broke, so nah, I can't.
I'm sure one of those guys would have treated you. You should have gone.
Nah, it's fine. I was busy anyway, so yeah. No.
I went to a book festival yesterday.
Nice.
Oh, nice.
And I made my rounds around the huge room. I took a video of it. I'll put it up in a video soon. Just like a couple hundred authors in there just selling their books.
Nice.
It was nuts. So I got a whole bunch of like business cards and stuff. Mm-hmm. So we can have some fresh guests for Livestream Sunday next season. I'm going to contact all these people. All these guys were very interesting, or were doing something unique with their books. There's one guy who writes specifically Florida themed murder mysteries. So he legit has a novel called Florida Man, and I'm just I can't even with this guy. Like I
was going to ask you, is his name Florida Man?
He knows what he's doing. Yeah, he's got another one set in Miami. He's got another, but the one that's like, I'm like, Florida Man, bro. Yeah, we gotta talk.
Nice.
Yeah, so lots of cool little interesting authors like that. There was another one who I'll be reaching out to. Her name is Patricia Daly Lipe. She published this and many other books actually, but she did that artwork herself. She's a painter as well as an author. Nice. And this is like all about creativity and writing and art, and not a how-to, but maybe like a motivational type deal, So I'll be reading this one and reaching out to her to come on the show and talk about it. And there was another, and then she has some other books that are all nonfiction, and they're all about like histories and stuff, and just very, very interesting covers and very interesting, themes and topics that she chose. It was kind of cool to see like all those authors in one place. We got to do something like that. I'm gonna try to get into it next year. Take my books and make splash.
Going to be like, Adrian's here. Just have a need to fear.
Have a booth, maybe sell some empanadas or something. Get people coming over with the smell, and then like, here, have a book. So, Ben, the topic of today was originally something that you picked out, something that you felt was not necessarily underrepresented, but something you wanted to talk about more. You wanted to kind of flesh out more as far as AuthorTube is concerned and all that. Was there anything specifically that you wanted to touch on that we haven't talked about yet?
A little bit.
Hit me.
I was just going to think about how there's different writing styles where magic can either be the underlying plot, or it can be a tool that people use. So I keep going back to Brandon Sanderson because he is the definitive author, the definitive expert on the topic. Because there's a lot of different writing styles, and a lot of people do design a magic system first and then build the world around it. And like his there's the Cosmere series, which are multiple. They seem like they're multiple different magic systems, but really they might all be connected. And then there's Elantris, which I think is one of his best standalones, or it's one of his favorite books, one of my favorites of his, where where it's such just a tightly written book, and the whole plot is magic has gone wrong, what happened and why. And so I think that was just done in such a interesting way. And yes, at the end of it, you're like, oh, well, of course, that makes perfect sense. And I'm glad that I went on this journey with the characters. And so there's just different ways there's an infinite number of ways of writing magic. There's an infinite number of ways of writing magic into our stories. And there's an infinite number of ways of focusing on that magic. So I just think that it's really something interesting that we could all discuss and share our expertise, and obviously not come up with the right way of doing it, but come up with a way that we ourselves have used magic in our stories to help expand those stories.
You know, I really like, and I'm probably most emulate or try to emulate, because, who knows, but I most try to emulate the kind of stuff that Neil Gaiman does, where I know he's got rules to his magic, but he never really spells them out. He never really gives them to you. He just allows them to exist, and he plays within them, and you kind of figure it out on your own. I think of the Graveyard Book.
That's a good one.
Yeah, where I had it around.
I actually got that from a book fair at school, I think. It was just a random one I saw there, and it's like, oh, that looks interesting. Still got it to this day.
Here it is. So, yeah, I love it. I made the mistake of trying to read it to my son before he was old enough. He got kind of scared. So I'll have to try it again another time. But Ben, have you ever read this? Are you familiar? The idea of the Graveyard Book is, what if the Jungle Book was in a graveyard instead of in a jungle? So Mowgli, instead of being adopted by animals, is adopted by ghosts. And instead of a panther who watches over him, it's a vampire. Stuff like that. Cool. But that's a perfect example where he never ever in the text explains that guy's a vampire. He just writes him as a vampire, and you're supposed to figure out, well, you never see him in the daytime. He's really pale, really tall. And when he talks to people, he can just make them do stuff. Like, he can just tell somebody, you don't want to come in here, and they'll be like, I don't want to go in there. And he'll be like, you want to go home? And they'll be like, I want to go home. And they'll go home. And you're like, vampire.
That's really interesting, though, because the snake in the Jungle Book had kind of the hypnotizing gaze. So
exactly. So there's little things like that. Instead of the monkeys that show up to haul him away, they're like little demons, these little goblins from the underworld that show up. So there's like all little things like that. There's a werewolf lady that shows up at one point instead of a bear. So things like that. But anyway, I bring it up because, in the Jungle Book, Mowgli's whole thing is that he learns to speak to the animals. So something equivalent has to happen to this character. His name is Nobody. And Nobody, he learns how to kind of be a ghost. He learns how to walk through walls and stuff, and sometimes go kind of invisible and things like that. And so he just kind of speaks the language of being a ghost, so to speak. And again, it's not something that he ever explains. You know what I mean? That seems like something that you would need to explain. A human living boy is able to go invisible or walk through walls, but he never really explains. He just explains that they taught him to do it, but he doesn't explain how it works, the actual mechanics of it. Cool. And so that's kind of what I like to do, where I know how it works, and I'll just show you that it's working, but I won't tell you how it's working. And I just hope that enough clues exist for you to be like, oh, I think I know how she's doing this.
It's kind of like I can't remember where I saw it. It's kind of like it's either the DeLorean or the actual time machine itself in Back to the Future. Never explained how it comes about, never explained anything about how it works, but it's there. And it's done in such a way that it makes sense, and you go, "Yeah, that's completely believable."
Yeah, he basically goes, he's exactly. Like the flux capacitor makes time travel possible. You need a nuclear reaction to get enough power to power that thing to go through time. That's it. And then how do you you punch the buttons? How do you pick you punch the buttons? You 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, the buttons. That's how you do it. You just punch the buttons and it works. Like what? Yeah, never explain it, but it should make sense to the reader or in Back to the Future.
You need to set the world up in a way that when they go into it, they go, yeah, that makes sense. Cool. Yeah. Let's read along with it. And as they go along, they don't sort of come up against snags. They go, wait a minute, that doesn't work with this. They go, oh yeah, okay, cool, let's go.
So counterpoint to that, I've gotten a lot of feedback from readers of where the magic felt easy or felt intuitive for certain characters, and they complained how not everything was explained as well as it would be, or it seemed too easy for certain characters to do certain things. So there is a balance that needs to be handled with that.
Well, what's interesting, and excuse me, what's interesting about your series, I've only read the first book, as you know. I haven't read the second one yet. I bought it, but I haven't read it.
Thank you.
What's interesting about it is that even though what you're writing is, by all intents and purposes, a magic system, I feel like you write it more like X-Men. You write it like innate abilities, almost like the mutant gene is expressed in X-Men. So in other words, if a character's ability, like Kitty Pryde from X-Men, is to go intangible and move through walls, that's her one power. So then what are all the different things that you can do with that? And all she has to do is be able to do it or not do it. And there's like an innateness in that, a breathing or not breathing kind of mentality behind it. Right. And so when I read your story, that's how it came off to me, and that's how I was able to accept it. And it sounds like your readers who are giving you that feedback are not reading it like that. They're reading it like Harry Potter, and like he needed to learn how to do that. How is he doing it without knowing how to do it? Nobody taught him how to do it, so how is he doing it?
And that is a beautiful metaphor, and that is exactly right. So
because and maybe it's because I see, we're kind of kindred spirits in that. You've read my novel, that Faye has innate abilities that she can just do. She sees auras, for example. That's just something that she can do, and I never explain why that's something that she can do or how she does it. She just does, and it's part of who she is. It's part of what she can do. She taps into other magics later on, but they don't come from her. There's something that she has to go and acquire. And so in that one, like, character's one story arc, I'm trying to explain to people that that's how it works. Some people have a thing, but they can also get more things. And hopefully that's enough for everybody to understand. You know what I mean? Like, if you can go get the other thing, then you can do the other thing. But until then, you can only do this thing.
Well, yeah. So, Natassha, in your world, is it like somebody has an innate ability to use fire magic or throw a fireball, and then somebody else can do like lightning or
fireball?
As I said, there's two different types of magic. There's light magic and dark magic. Everybody has one or the other. They have a base of it, but some people are better at casting certain spells with that magic. So say somebody's better at casting fireballs with light magic. Some people are better at casting sort of portals with dark magic. So everyone has that base ability, but for each of them it branches off in a different direction. They can either choose to sort of follow that along or try and specialize in other areas. But with my main character, she has an innate ability because of something that happened to her, but I have to explain that because I have to explain the reason why she got that innate ability, but can't do any of the things that anybody else can. So yeah, people sort of do specialize in other things, but yeah, they each have a similar base.
That's so excuse me, that's so interesting with the light magic and the dark magic, because one of the things that I wanted to do was, since I have seen the whole light magic, dark magic thing done a lot. I've seen it done really well. I've seen it done very poorly. And what I wanted was something more along the lines of a spectrum, not in intensity, but just different kinds. And so there is light based magic and darkness based magic, but they're just two among many other types of magic. They are not the two sides. There's also elemental magic that we're going to learn about in the second book: fire, wind, water, all those kind of based magics, and then some other like fun stuff too in the later books. So like that's something that I wanted to play with in my magic system, was the idea of like, instead of having the duality of the two sides, like what if there was like a bunch of different kinds, and you couldn't necessarily do all of them. Like you have to like learn and or become proficient in each, and if there was someone who was proficient in many, that would be a very formidable being, a very formidable foe. And what would that look like? And what would that, how would that mess things up for everybody?
Yeah, I mean, I've gone sort of the more traditional route of having them sort of two sides of the same coin, but within those two sides, as I said, there's people who specialize in certain things. So say you've got a light mage, like a light mage and a dark mage, both of them can specialize in healing, but they'll both be good at different things within healing. So in mine, there's sort of close healing, which is really detailed healing, and then sort of far away healing, which is more sort of general healing. And one mage specializes in one mage specializes in the other. And as I said, it depends on the base of magic. So you can try and change it. You can try and specialize in close healing if you're only good at far healing. You can only go so far because of your base magic.
That's cool.
Yeah,
I dig that. That's cool. That's very cool. Right on. What, Ben? Anything else on your list? That was the big one for you.
That was the big one. Everything else we've really tackled, I think.
What about you, Natassha? Did you have anything, any thoughts or any parts of the topic that you wanted to kind of delve more into, even if it's something we've already mentioned?
I mean, it's kind of brief, but one thing I wanted to bring up was, when I was at uni, we did our writing course, and I think it was our third year, we were studying all the different genres. Fantasy wasn't on there, and when I questioned why fantasy wasn't on the list, our teacher said, "Oh, you can learn everything there is to learn about writing fantasy from writing the other genres." And I'm sort of like, hang on a second, how do you learn how to write sort of a good fantasy world? How do you learn how to write the rules for magic? By writing romance or writing crime?
Right.
And it's a bit like, well, you need to be able to write fantasy and learn how to write fantasy to write the magic world, because it's such a unique thing to fantasy and sci-fi. You're not going to find it anywhere else. So yeah. That's my pet peeve, when somebody says, "Nah, you don't need to learn fantasy. You can just learn it from all the other genres."
Well, it's an interesting thought, because on the one hand, I suppose as a Libra, I'm going to do that thing where I see both sides of the argument, because in my humble opinion, fantasy and sci-fi both I consider to be more blanket genres, so to speak, that you can the thing that blankets the world. It's a sci-fi world or it's a fantasy world, and then within that world you're telling stories, and those stories might have a completely different genre. In the case of my novel, it's a murder mystery, but it's set in a sci-fi fantasy world, and you've got the sci-fi stuff, the tech stuff, the space stuff. You have all that stuff. You have the magic stuff from the fantasy, but neither one of them are the story. The story is a murder mystery. And so and you have things like Game of Thrones. Game of Thrones, the first book is technically a murder mystery. It all begins with who killed Jon Arryn and why. And we don't get those answers until book 4, but we do get them. And anyway, so so perhaps in that sense, maybe that's what he's referring to. This idea of like, there's the thing for the world, and then there's the genre of the story. Whereas, something like romance, that's not a blanket genre of the world. That's the plot of
No.
the story. The plot of the story is that it's a romance between these people.
Mm.
You know, same thing with whether it's a thriller or, you know, horror, whatever it is. These genres are way more specific to the characters and what the characters are going through. Whereas you could conceivably have a fantasy story that takes place in a fantasy world with a character who never, not only doesn't do magic, maybe he never even witnesses it. You know, maybe it's rare enough that he never even gets to witness it. You could tell an entire story in a fantasy world that has no magic in it. It is possible to do so, I suppose. I wouldn't want to do so,
No.
but it's absolutely possible. So I don't know. So, you know, there's that argument is all I'm saying is to be made. Whereas I know people will argue all day long fantasy is a genre and sci-fi is a genre. And I'm like, go for it, dude. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that was just my pet peeve with that. It's like, well, how am I supposed to learn how to write sort of a well done sort of magic if I don't study fantasy, you know?
Right.
Yeah.
And I will say we didn't study a single fantasy book.
Well, it's so
that's a shame.
I mean,
it is a shame.
It is a shame because that course was good, but I think the only thing that came close to a proper fantasy book was, I think it was like Day of the Triffids. That's the only one that I can remember that came vaguely close to it. So it's like, well, why are we doing a creative writing course when we're not studying fantasy? You know, because it's such a big, as you said, blanket genre, such a big genre.
It is very broad.
It should be in everything, you know. But yeah, we didn't study a single one.
Yeah, maybe the correct frame of thinking then would be it is so broad that it should be a whole other course all by itself. You know, like you have literary fiction, and then you have just fantasy over here. It's just so broad, and all the things that you can do with it. At the same time, you know, there's so many authors who will tell you, and I believe it myself, that whatever genre it is that you write, you should be reading the other genres. Like you should be reading and there are things to learn in those other genres that you can then use to write your genre better. And you know, I've definitely found that to be true. And then on top of that, there's the idea of all fiction that you consume. So television shows, movies, this all, you know, when people ask me, you know, who's going to like your book? My first thought is, well, it's going to be fans of like Inception or fans of like, you know, I'm thinking movies. I'm not necessarily thinking novels. I'm fans of Breaking, you know, so it's interesting.